They said it was over. Fucking liars.
One, two, three!
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with episode 23 of Halloween Horror Movie Review Season 3. And this episode is going to be for the fourth installment of a Satanic Kid franchise that I have been reviewing for this season, or finishing up on this season. And this one was not actually released like the previous three in this one. This one was instead dumped to TV. And, this TV-made fourth sequel is going to be for 1991 or 1990s Omen 4 The Awakening. Oh, God, yep. That one. Let's get on with the plot before I get into details. As we all know, Damien Thorne is dead, but his prophecy is reborn in a mysterious girl named Delia, who was adopted by two attorneys, Jean and Karen York. When Karen realizes her baby was born under suspicious circumstances, she hires a private investigator to find Delia's real parents. A series of bizarre accidents occur, and Karen begins to suspect everyone of conspiracy against her as she unravels the truth about her baby. Yeah, it's pretty much the plot of this film. Well, how was this made? Well, the film was intended to be the first of many television sequels to 20th Century Fox's film history of popular titles. Producer Harvey Bernhard, who produced the last three films, felt there could be more done to this series. It would go on to be the last film he produced. Not a good way to go out. He previously wrote the story for the second film, but this is the only film that he co-wrote. And so, Omen 4 The Awakening was filmed on location in Vancouver, British Columbia, and you can literally tell in many scenes that this isn't all in Vancouver. They don't even try to make it secret. You can tell it was filmed in Vancouver in the most obvious ways possible because there's one scene where the characters go to Science World. They don't even change the Science World name to something else, so that people will think it's still America or something. No, it's still Science World. You can literally tell the place is still Science World. But anyway, back to production stuff. And the score was composed by Jonathan Schiffer, who wrote original music and reference themes written by Jerry Goldsmith for previous films. And then after the movie was marketed, filmed, finished, and released, Omen 4 The Awakening premiered on television in North America on May 20th, 1991. The film was given theatrical release in some countries like Australia, where it premiered on August 9th, 1991, and the United Kingdom, where it opened on November 29th, 1991. It was largely panned by critics upon release, and fans of the franchise. And rightfully so, because here's why. Because, as for my reaction, this is the worst Omen film ever made, and one of the worst horror sequels ever made in horror history. This movie was even made for television and not theaters, and here you can literally see why that was. I just was even more bored than with Final Conflict. I was more bored with this film. It had no reason to even exist at all. This movie is unworthy of the Omen title. It's just so bad that it's actually damaged the classic nature of the first three. It never should have been made, and they should have changed the title. And when I first watched this week, I was fully expecting this made-for-TV sequel to suck. And in that respect, I was right. This cheaply made, badly written, poorly acted piece of excrement is tantamount to blasphemy for fans of the Omen series, being devoid of the forbidding atmosphere of the other films, totally bereft of creative kills, and completely lacking in scares. Instead, we get silly shenanigans with New Age mystics, an ugly kid sorely in need of a good orthodontist, a score that sounds like it should be accompanying a trope of circus clowns, as subtle as a brick images of inverted crosses and nauseum, and worst of all, satanic carol singers. It's obviously impossible to know how much of Omen 4 The Awakening was directed by Gerald and Morrissey, but you can sort of tell all was not well behind the cameras, as it's a shabby, cheap-looking, poorly made film which is actually made for TV, and it shows with the bland, flat, and unimaginative cinematography and production design. There's the total lack of scares, atmosphere, tension, and gore, which are the main elements that made the previous Omen films so effective. And the budget must have been clearly low, and the film looks like it was. The best, most stylish thing about Omen 4 The Awakening was the final shot in which the camera rises up in the air as Delilah walks away into the distance to reveal a crucifix-shaped cross made by two overlapping paths, but this is the very last shot before the end credits roll, which says just about everything I have to mention. The music, which sounds awful, more suited to a comedy, and is very inappropriate sounding. The acting is alright at best, but as usual, the kid just is really annoying. What's more is they don't even spell Damien Thorne's name correctly. And there are no daggers, the most important element of all the Omen films. Only the Antichrist could have been behind such a disaster. One only hopes that this irony was the motivating force behind the film. This movie's just so bad. I felt like I had to go on my iPad several times because of how boring this film was. But I had to watch it anyway because I needed to make this video and trash this movie. What makes this movie all the more tragic is that it had such great source material. I've never seen a movie where all the elements were so grotesquely mediocre as to render the result less than the sum of its parts. And as with many other pop culture franchise series, this line just didn't know when to quit. Instead of leaving things as they were perfectly ended, they wanted to generate the first installment of this franchise to fall sorely short of the mark. The film does not offer anything new or triggering to the Omen lineup. As unique and genuine as Omen 4 tries to be compared to its siblings, the similarities and plot devices are embarrassingly alike. Elements like the guardian dog, the involvement of a priest, the skepticism of the people involved, the decapitation death scene, which is clearly a homage to the original film when the journalist is beheaded by the sheet of glass. It's done so much better in that movie. They literally ripped off a better scene from the original masterpiece. Even right down to the father's involvement in politics and prestige within the community make it too predictable. Although it is common to star a B-rated cast into a horror title this far into a series, the acting is off the charts, chock full of ridiculousness and unintentional humor due to some of the poorly delivered lines throughout the film. The atmosphere has completely vanished in comparison to the first three titles. In addition, the epic score composed by Goldsmith in the previous movies has been replaced by an auditory debacle, an absolute joke. It just made me wonder if it was actually intended to be used for this film, or just pulled from a bank of stock audio, which really says something, because rarely do I comment on the lousy misuse of a musical score until now. As for the plot, I'm sorry, New Age mysticism, whatever happened to the gritty realism of the original trilogy? In those films, more so in the first two than the third, but still, the supernatural was for the most part implied, and it was this subtlety that made the movie so early believable. Here we have crystals going black, like the Dark Crystal. They need to rip off the Dark Crystal, apparently, and inverted crucifixes galore, even though in certain scenes the crucifix would be perfectly normal, but for the camera angle, gone is the refined psychological manipulation tapping the Eliza inheritance in our for collective psyche. In its place, it's a bore slap in the face of recycled cliche and transparent incompetence. Add to that a lead actor so unbelievably annoying that you fervently think the director for those scenes from which he is absent. Never I would have seen a little girl so fundamentally irritating at all in any horror movie. There's just many WTF moments, or what the fuck moments, too, that provide the unintended comedy relief. For example, like, what's with the major overreaction at the beginning of the movie when the baby scratches the mother's cheek, like, entirely a 360-degree head turning Omen. I also laughed at the overreaction at the baptism. Like, the baby cries, everyone looks very concerned. The distressed mother runs out of the church, and the priest is left looking very alarmed while crossing himself. Like, hmm? Then there's the New Age nanny that seems to have carte blanche of exposing an 8-year-old to all kinds of alternative spiritualism. I even laughed when the nanny suggested bringing the troubled Delilah to a psychic fair to meet the nanny's hippie friends, and the mother just shrugs her shoulders and allows it. Like, yeah, that's groovy. I'll fill my troubled 8-year-old daughter's head with all of this mysticism stuff. That's cool, I don't need to be there. Of course, this would be expected from a mother who allows her daughter to adopt a fully grown Rottweiler, the encounter on the street that could bite the little girl's head off as a snack. And the entire scene of the psychic fair is quite comical in a slapstick kind of way. And from the horrified reactionary stares of the psychics and Delilah, ensuring inferno. And like I mentioned, this movie was shot in Vancouver, BC. And they don't even try to hide this. You can tell it was shot in Vancouver in the most obvious ways possible, because like I've mentioned before, there's a scene where all the characters go to Science World. Yeah, where the characters visit Science World, and as soon as the scene starts, you even see the Science World building, and you see the Science World logo, what it used to look like in the 90s. Yeah. I don't even try to call it something else that it still looks like it's still this movie set in America, but was shot in BC. Even lots of movies that were shot in Vancouver do better jobs at hiding it and making it look like it's still in the US. Like Final Destination 5 is shot in Vancouver. Final Destination 3 was also shot in Vancouver. And they don't copy the actual places they were shot as names. They give them different names so that they look like they're still set in the US. Like, this movie can't even try to call Science World a different place. Instead, we still have to leave Science World on there. And you can literally tell this was filmed in Vancouver. Like, oh, and that the 1990 miniseries It was shot in New Westminster, BC. And even they made it look like it was an American town. But you can kind of tell it's still BC because of the ending. But even that hid the BC location better than this movie ever did. But the sequel does have some tiny moments, like the deaths were average, but if you insist to want to know what the deaths are, there's a guy who got his head sliced off, and Nanny who falls out of the window, Iron Stalker hit by a crane's hook, and finally there's Karen York shooting herself when she can't kill her devil children. There's just lots of things left unexplained, and the ending in other parts bears too much resemblance to the original. And among the treats include the music by Jerry Goldsmith, which is recycled from the first film. Jonathan Shepard's new music feels like a rushed job, but it's the least of the film's problems, because anyway, despite some decent qualities, Omen 4 The Awakening is one of the worst sequels ever made, and I definitely, thankfully, will never have to see this again. So in the end, Omen 4 The Awakening is by far one of the worst horror films ever made, and should never be seen. Like Al Pacino says it best in Jack and Jill, which is also a bad movie, but Al Pacino would summarize this best. This must never be seen. By anyone. Even if you're a fan of the other two sequels. And to some degree, if you were a fan of Final Conflict. Nobody should have to watch this. Like, there's a reason this movie was never released on DVD unless it has a Scream Factory box set. It's pretty much the only way to own this. And for good reason. Anyway, that's it for my review of Omen 4 The Awakening. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Omen 4 The Awakening, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you want to see the Omen franchise continue after the third one, then I'm sorry, but it is not worth doing so at all if you plan to watch this movie. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Omen 4 The Awakening, I'm going to give Omen 4 The Awakening a 0 out of 10. There we go. That wraps up my review for Omen 4 The Awakening. So you're wondering, what's going to be the next episode? Well, we are down to the final 2 episodes of the series, of the season. And our next episode of the 2 that are going to be the first final episode is going to be back into the world of Psycho. Because the next episode is going to be for the first sequel to the Alfred Hitchcock classic that came 20 years after the original movie, or 23 years after the original movie, and was not directed by Hitchcock because he sadly passed away in 1980, but it was the film that continued the story of Norman Bates and cemented it as a slasher franchise. Yes, Psycho 2 is going to be next, and from what I heard, this one's apparently a fan favorite. Anyway, guys, that'll be it for this episode. Thank y'all for watching. If you like this, want to see more, don't forget to like and subscribe to Don G. Corleone.